Her laugh cut through the room like a butter knife through burnt pie. I mean, seriously, Vivian said, twirling the stack of matte black cards like they were some novelty coaster set. Did you print these yourself at Kinko's? Then, without even glancing at me, she dumped them in the kitchen trash can with a flick of her wrist. Nobody cares. The rustle of the garbage bag felt louder than it should have. Her lover, Preston Blake, sitting at our table masquerading as a close family friend, snorted Chardonnay through his nose. Even her mother, the queen of the Barton Creek Country Club, chimed in with a barely muted chuckle. Well, it's the thought that counts. Dear, I didn't move. Just cut another slice of turkey. Pass the cranberry sauce. Smiled the same smile I always wore when her family started in that tight-lipped, controlled thing I perfected over a decade of being treated like a piece of well-dressed lint on their Westlake Hills Persian rug. What kind of title even is this? Preston muttered from the side table, having caught a glimpse before she tossed them. Executive partner. Sounds like something from a pyramid scheme. I think it means he owns like one vending machine. Another added, cue more laughter. If you are listening and waiting for the moment a man snaps, trust me, you'll want to hear where this goes. I didn't react. I never did. My job wasn't to perform. It never had been. They didn't know that silence is a weapon. The longer you let people talk, the more they reveal about themselves. I remembered standing in the gritty downtown parking garage off 6th Street a month prior, where my private investigator, Hayes Covington, handed me the manila envelope. Inside were the downloaded iCloud backups, the intercepted text chains, the hidden nanny cam stills of Vivian and Preston tangled in our bed. But I waited. And then Charles, Uncle Charles, her dad's older brother, with the failing eyes and shaky hands. Not exactly the guy you expect to change the temperature of a room. He'd been quiet most of the night, nursing a Pinot Noir and watching the whole circus unfold with the tired resignation of a man who'd survived 3 divorces and 2 board coups. While they joked, he wandered into the kitchen. I saw him kneel by the trash, fish one of the cards out of the garbage like it was a lost relic. He adjusted his glasses, squinted, and then he froze. The card trembled in his hand. Then the wine glass and the other slipped, crashed, stem snapped clean. Everyone turned. Forks paused midair. Even the family dog stopped chewing on his stolen roll. This title, Charles said, voice brittle, confused. Is this real? No one answered. He looked at me, suddenly sober. Pierce Harrison, you are the executive partner of Triarch Equity. I nodded once, calm, unbothered. Vivian's fork hit the plate. Wait, what's Triarch? Charles cut her off. You don't know. His eyes darted back to the card. You threw this away, Vivian? Her father, Mitchell, said from across the room, irritated. Don't start. But Charles ignored him, still staring at the card like it was a detonator. Triarch just closed the federal warehousing bid, the one every East Coast logistics firm was fighting over. You know who lost it? We did. And you're telling me this? He pointed to me. Pierce is the guy behind it. Nobody laughed now. Preston Blake's arrogant smirk vanished. I reached for the gravy boat. I told you it was a good quarter. Vivian blinked, mouth slightly open. One of the younger cousins finally broke the silence. What's federal warehousing? The aunt beside him whispered something about military contracts. Her voice shook. I took another bite. The turkey was a little dry, not terrible, but forgettable. What wasn't forgettable was the moment her family's arrogance cracked like a wine glass on Austin limestone. You could hear it, feel it, that sudden, subtle shift from derision to uncertainty. And that's when I knew I wouldn't have to say another word tonight. The silence would do it for me. Charles caught up with me on the back patio. The others were still inside, probably debating cranberry sauce brands like it was policy. The cold Austin air had a bite, but his voice came out in a whisper, so sharp it might have cut through steel. I thought Triarch was a ghost firm, he said. Rumors, quiet bids, no public board. He looked down at the card in his hand again, like he still didn't believe what was printed. You're the lead partner. I didn't bother with theatrics, just nodded. He leaned against the railing like someone had kicked the wind out of him. My God, he muttered, you're the one who outbid us on the Port Archer contract, the federal one. Logistics and warehousing. He looked up. We've spent 8 months chasing that, and you sealed it. His voice cracked a little at the end like he didn't want to believe the answer he already knew. I kept my tone flat, closed last Tuesday. His mouth hung open. He started doing the math in his head, and I could see the dominoes falling behind his eyes. His firm had been relying on that contract to maintain their regional footprint. It wasn't just a deal, it was their artery. Inside laughter burst out again. Preston had probably made another jab at my executive sounding title. I heard someone shout, "I bet he printed those at Staples." Charles didn't laugh. He was sweating now. "Does Mitchell know?" he asked, meaning her father. "No," I said, "not yet." Charles exhaled hard and pinched the bridge of his nose. Damn. Damn. You know this affects half our storage pipeline. You've effectively boxed us into subleasing on our own routes. Then he paused. "And Mitchell's still mocking you in there like you're someone's assistant." I shrugged. People see what they want to see. He looked at me for a long second. "You're not going to tell them, are you? Would it change anything?" His jaw tightened. "It would humiliate them." I took the card back from his hand and slipped it into my wallet. "They've had that opportunity all night." I didn't wait for a reply. Just stepped back into the house. The lights, the noise, the smug voices, they all seemed so far removed from the man Charles had just realized he'd been sitting across from. I said my goodbyes politely, kissed Vivian on the cheek. She barely looked up from whatever shallow conversation she and Preston were still circling. "Going somewhere?" she asked, distracted. "Yeah," I said. "Got an early call. More of your little empire to run?" She joked with that same mocking tone she'd used all night. I just smiled and nodded. Something like that, and I left. The truth was, I hadn't even planned to bring those cards. They weren't for them. I'd printed a fresh set that week because the old title was outdated. The ink was still drying when I slid them into my coat pocket. What they didn't know, and wouldn't know until much later, was that Triarch Equity had finalized 3 acquisitions that same week. Not just the federal contract, but 3 feeder companies that supplied warehousing tech, security, logistics, and yes, packaging. All routes that her family's firm and Preston's subsidiary depended on. They weren't just about to learn who Pierce Harrison was, they were about to learn what I owned. And it wouldn't come in a headline. It would come on the balance sheet, quiet, brutal, final. By Monday morning, the whispers had become phone calls, and her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Vivian sat at the kitchen island of our high-stakes marriage built on a facade of wealth and success, her artisanal coffee untouched, scrolling through group chats that had gone from mocking to manic. One cousin sent a link, another sent a screenshot. Then finally the call came from Olivia, the family's self-appointed gatekeeper of business gossip. Olivia worked procurement at Ridgemont Group, one of the mid-tier vendors that serviced their family's entire logistics chain. "Hey," Olivia said, breathless. "No pleasantries. Tell me this isn't true." "What, your husband? Did Pierce? Did he take over Norville Supply?" Vivian laughed hard. "What? No, he's still running that little startup of his, something with packaging." Olivia didn't laugh. "No, you don't get it. Norville is gone. Absorbed. Folded into something called Triarch, effective last Thursday. The emails are already bouncing." Vivian blinked. "Wait, what? You're serious?" "I work with them, Vivian. Half our Q1 inventory came through Norville, and now the new contact emails are all redirecting to Triarch domains." A pause. "Did you know about this?" Vivian stared at her reflection in the microwave door. "No," she said slowly. "I didn't." Olivia hung up. "No goodbye." Vivian set her phone down. The silence in the house was too clean, too balanced, like everything was about to tip. She got up and walked to my home office. The door wasn't locked. It never was. I never needed locks. My laptop was still open on the desk. She hesitated for a second, then moved quickly. She didn't know what exactly she was looking for. Maybe just a sliver of truth to laugh at. Maybe something to confirm that this whole Triarch thing was just a coincidence, a name overlap, some shell firm with a borrowed logo. Instead, she found a folder titled Confirmed Contracts Q1, a spreadsheet listing over 40 companies, including Norville, Castor Logistics, and Turnfleet. Email correspondence from p.harrison@triarch-holdings.com. An internal memo welcoming 6 new logistics coordinators to Triarch's Austin division, all names she recognized from her father's vendor network. Her throat went dry. Beside it was another folder, minimized but visible, containing the forensic financial audit of our shared accounts. Then came the quiet sound of the shower turning off upstairs. She slammed the laptop closed and backed out of the room like she'd stepped on glass. I walked down a few minutes later, towel around my waist, hair still damp, calm as ever. She was seated back at the kitchen island, eyes fixed on the marble. I didn't even look surprised. You went through my files? I asked, voice low. She didn't speak, didn't need to. The laptop was still breathing quietly on the desk behind her. I poured myself a coffee, added no sugar, and sipped. Then casually, without malice, without triumph, I said, "Next time you throw something out." I looked at her. "Check the print first." She opened her mouth, closed it. There was nothing to say that wouldn't dig the hole deeper. Because in that moment, it hit her. This wasn't about one lucky deal. This wasn't some fluke where I accidentally ended up on the winning side of a contract bid. This was a network, and not the kind her family played tennis with. No, this was a lattice of acquisitions, legal bridges, shell entities with real teeth. It had reach, coordination, layers. She thought I'd been tinkering in the background, playing entrepreneur with safe money, a harmless hobby. But she'd been wrong, dead wrong. The man she mocked for printing his own business cards had just folded 3 of her family's legacy vendors into a firm she couldn't even pronounce correctly 2 days ago. She suddenly remembered something else from Thanksgiving. When Charles asked if the card was real, when the room went cold, she had laughed, tried to brush it off, but Charles didn't, and neither would her father once he saw what was already unraveling. Because now it wasn't about pride, it was about control, and she had just realized how little of it they had left. It was almost midnight. The house was quiet, too quiet, except for the clink of ice in her father's glass and the low murmur of his voice echoing through the hallway. Vivian had come downstairs for water, but paused when she heard him in the kitchen. The tone wasn't his usual booming confidence. It was something tighter, clipped, like he was trying not to lose his grip. She stepped softly, barefoot on hardwood, and stopped just short of the doorway. He hadn't noticed her. His back was to the hallway, hunched over the island, one hand gripping the phone, the other rubbing his temple like it hurt to think. No, Charles confirmed it. Mitchell was saying the bid's gone. They secured the whole contract under some umbrella group. Triarch Equity. A pause. No, not public. Quiet as hell. That's what's so goddamn frustrating. Boards and chaos. Everyone thought Norville would roll into Q1 as primary supplier. Now we're scrambling. Vivian's heart stuttered. Triarch Equity. She stepped into the kitchen carefully. Dad. He turned startled. His face was flushed. Not with drink, but with stress. What are you doing up? He asked quickly, muting the phone. I heard you say Triarch Equity. His expression shifted. Defensive, annoyed. Yes. What? She swallowed. That's the name on Pierce's card for a beat. He stared at her like he couldn't process the sentence. Then realization hit fast, hard. Your husband is tied to Triarch. She didn't answer. Not really. Her silence said everything. He let out a bitter laugh and shook his head, muttering into the air, Jesus Christ. No wonder Charles looked like he'd seen a ghost. She moved toward the counter slowly, her voice quieter. You're saying his company beat yours? It wasn't even a fight, he snapped. They came in under radar, swept the contract, bundled logistics, security, fleet management, everything. It's not just this deal, Vivian. We're exposed. Charles says they've got fingers in at least 4 feeder companies. Preston Blake's entire division is locked out. I don't even know what we're attached to anymore. The panic in his voice cracked something inside her. She had grown up believing her father was unshakable. He'd once told a state senator to get in line. Now he looked like a man realizing the line had moved and he wasn't in it. Vivian sat down slowly, the granite of the island suddenly feeling cold beneath her palms. He never talked about it, she said half to herself. Never once mentioned Triarch. I thought he was still dealing with that small firm. The subscription box thing, her father snorted. That was probably a decoy. You ever ask what he was doing on his laptop all the time? She nodded. I checked it. Friday, he raised an eyebrow. I found the contracts. Norville Turnfleet Caster. There's more. Way more. Her father exhaled, leaned on the island. So, he's not just involved, he is Triarch. Vivian didn't know what to say. All she could think of was the Thanksgiving dinner, the laughter, the mocking, the way she tossed my cards like scraps, the way she dismissed me in front of her entire family in Preston. And now, just days later, the company name on those cards was gutting her family's influence from the inside, and she'd invited it in. She felt her face flush with something deeper than embarrassment. This wasn't just about her marriage. This was about everything she'd taken for granted. Power, status, control, and how she'd failed to see the quiet storm building in the man sleeping next to her. Don't tell anyone yet, her father said, pacing now. We need to understand how deep this goes before we make it worse. But it was already worse. She could feel it in her bones. Triarch wasn't just some upstart company with good timing. It was a calculated machine built piece by piece by the man she'd belittled for years. I didn't wear tailored suits. I didn't chase headlines. I chased leverage. And now, with every vendor that slipped away, every contract that vanished, her father's empire was bleeding, and her husband was the one holding the scalpel. Vivian stood slowly, her breath shaky. For the first time in her life, she wasn't sure which family she belonged to anymore. Her phone rang just after sunrise. Charles. She stared at the screen for a second before answering. The last time they spoke, his voice had cracked with panic. This time it was different, controlled, but heavy, like someone who'd finally mapped out a fire and realized it was already too late to stop it. Vivian, he said without greeting, this isn't just about Norval. I've been digging. She stayed quiet, coffee in hand, barefoot on the cold kitchen tile. He's been buying feeder companies, Charles continued. All small regional logistics, packaging, fleet services, distribution, routing. Some of them were hanging on by a thread. He didn't just outbid us. He saved them, rebranded them, folded them under Triarch Holdings, and no one even noticed. She pressed the speakerphone and set it down, needing both hands to steady the mug. You sure it's him? I traced director filings. He said it's all indirect, but Vivian, your husband's fingerprints are on everything. His name doesn't always show up, but the LLC patterns, the board reshuffles, the redirections, it's him. The structure is deliberate, the silence intentional. She forced a laugh, but it came out brittle. He's not that strategic. You said that last week, Charles snapped, and now half your father's vendors have changed emails. Silence. He never bragged, she said quietly, mostly to herself. Not once. No. Charles agreed. Because bragging gets you seen. He didn't want to be seen. He wanted to own. She reached for the laptop again, opened the same spreadsheet she hadn't dared look at since Friday. It was still there. The acquisition roadmap. Only now it made sense. Every company had a function. One handled dry goods storage, another handled climate-controlled fleet dispatching. One managed regulatory compliance. Another ran AI routing software for final mile delivery. She clicked open the integration tab. There it was. Q3 forecast complete systems integration, supply chain ownership in bold, projected margin control 72%. She stared at the number 72%. I didn't just build a business. I built control, not loud, not flashy, but ironclad. And the worst part, it had all happened under their noses. While they laughed about my hobby, I'd woven vines through the foundation of their entire regional operation, not a single piece owned outright, but every single piece tied to me. He's not just a vendor now, Charles said. He's a spine. Remove him and half of our operation seizes. Vivian gripped the edge of the table. Her father had built his empire on handshakes and ego. He never anticipated someone like Pierce, someone who didn't want the spotlight, who didn't care about being invited to the club or praised at dinner. She remembered her own words from Thanksgiving. Nobody cares. God, the irony. I didn't need anyone to care because while they were building image, I was building infrastructure. I need to talk to him, she muttered, standing suddenly. Charles exhaled. Don't threaten him. Don't poke. He's holding the entire system in balance. The minute he feels pressure, he'll let it collapse on purpose. And then we're all screwed. The line went dead. She stood alone in the kitchen, heart pounding. The walls of the house felt different now, like they weren't hers, like they were made of borrowed brick and paper confidence. And at the center of it all was a man she thought she understood, the man who sat silent at family dinners, who let the insults roll off his back, who picked up the tab and said nothing when her father joked about startup toys and hustle hobbies. That man had quietly threaded their world together like vines choking a stone mansion. And now, if he decided to pull, the whole house would groan, then crack, then fall. The boardroom had never been silent for this long. Normally, it buzzed with posturing, interruptions, dry jokes, the occasional ego-driven monologue about quarterly dominance. But today, there were no spreadsheets on the table, no slides, just paper folders, laptops, and the heavy stench of panic masked by cologne. Her father stood at the head of the long walnut table, sleeves rolled, jaw set. The veins in his hands bulged every time he gripped the armrest of his chair. Vivian sat 2 seats down from him, arms crossed, eyes flicking between directors who no longer made eye contact. Everything is compromised, Mitchell said flatly. Norville's not ours. Castor's not renewing. Turnfleet redirected their entire route planning to Triarch infrastructure as of last Thursday. Can we cancel? One director asked, voice tight. We tried, Mitchell snapped. There are no cancellation clauses. Every agreement is watertight, ironclad, executed with precision. A younger board member at the far end of the table raised his hand tentatively. Do we even know who Triarch is? There's no org chart, no press, no CEO profile. Vivian didn't speak. Her father didn't look at her. He glared, but it was Vivian's mother who finally said it. Quiet. Cutting. You told us he was harmless. The sentence hung in the room like a smoke alarm no one could reach. Vivian felt her skin crawl. She could feel the heat rising in her cheeks, but her throat was dry. She wanted to say something, anything to shift the weight off her shoulders, but what could she say? That the man she married, the man she belittled at family dinners, had just outplayed every executive in the room, that I had been laying groundwork while she rolled her eyes at my little business chats. That she had laughed as she threw away the business cards that were now the only thing standing between their family and a full logistical collapse. Her silence was her answer. One of the senior advisors, a friend of the family for decades, finally leaned back and sighed. I told you years ago that arrogance blinds more than failure ever could. No one corrected him. Mitchell opened a folder. Inside were copies of the supplier agreements they had signed over the past year. They had looked routine then, favorable terms, slightly aggressive scheduling clauses, but nothing that stood out. Except now every one of those contracts had been drafted by Triarch subsidiaries operating under different names at the time. Smart, silent, strategic, and I had orchestrated it all. I didn't need a seat at this table. I owned the floor under it. We're entangled, another executive muttered. If we try to untangle now, we'll lose supply for at least 6 months. That's half our distribution cycle. It would tank Q1. Tanking Q1 might be our best outcome. Someone else whispered. Mitchell stood again. Palms on the table. We regroup. We double back on contracts. We find legal footholds. Something. Have you talked to him directly? Her mother asked. He didn't answer. Vivian finally spoke. Her voice was quiet, but clear. He won't come to the table. Everyone turned. He already set the table. She continued, we just didn't realize we were eating off it. The silence that followed wasn't just tension, it was acceptance. They had treated Pierce like a footnote, like a harmless bystander to their empire. And now the bystander had rewired the entire grid. Vivian looked down at her hands. Her wedding ring caught the light. She had worn it like a badge of normalcy, of control. But it wasn't that anymore. It was a reminder not of love, but of who she should have known, and who now knew everything about her world while saying nothing at all. Saturday morning brought the storm. The front page of the Business Tribune landed with a quiet thunk on driveways across 5 states. Some readers ignored it, some skimmed it, but by noon it was in every inbox that mattered. Headline, From Invisible to Inevitable. How Triarch quietly captured the supply chain. Below the title wasn't a portrait, no glossy profile shot, no smiling executive in a blazer leaning against a warehouse door. It was a photo of a business card. Matte black, minimal text, embossed lettering. Pierce Harrison, executive partner, Triarch Equity Holdings. Vivian stared at it on her tablet screen, frozen in place at her breakfast bar, the same card she'd thrown in the garbage, the one that had made her laugh. Now it was the symbol of what every boardroom was whispering about, and she was nowhere near the punchline anymore. She clicked into the article, hands trembling. It was methodical, surgical, a timeline of silent acquisitions, smart contracts, anonymous shell LLCs, logistics, packaging, supply chain redundancies, all consolidated under Triarch equity in under 18 months. Unheard of. The journalist called it the quiet surge. One section broke it down by region. Another had quotes from CEOs and executives praising the operations precision. Whoever's behind Triarch isn't just a business mind, they're a ghost in the system. They made sure no one saw them until they were the only option left. A masterclass in being underestimated. He played the fool long enough for everyone to underestimate him. Then he rewrote the rules. Vivian felt like the floor under her had cracked. That last quote, it wasn't just analysis, it was a mirror. Her phone lit up. First, it was Kelsey from the old internship group. Is this your Pierce? Like your Pierce? Then her yoga instructor. Wait, isn't this your husband? You said he was in boxes or something. And then her investment club's group chat exploded. Vivian, that's your last name, right? Harrison. Holy shit, you're married to this guy. Why didn't you say anything? Did you know? She didn't reply to any of them. The worst one came 5 minutes later from a partner at a fund she'd been trying to charm into a joint real estate project for over a year. Hey, if your husband's ever looking for minority equity partners, loop me in. Hell of a strategy. Her hands shook. She nearly dropped the phone. She remembered mocking me about the empire I claimed to be building, all the dinners she'd cut me off mid-sentence to talk about her own deal flow, the way she'd corrected me in front of her parents when I mentioned distribution bottlenecks as if I was the amateur. Now the industry was quoting my playbook and she was the one getting tagged in LinkedIn comments like a +1 at her own wedding. She opened Instagram. A friend had already posted a story with the article. Dead ass, we thought he was the quiet guy. Turns out he owns half the table. Under it, someone had commented, "Isn't that Vivian's husband? Didn't she clown him at Thanksgiving?" Her stomach dropped. This wasn't just a career flex. It was legacy, and her ridicule of it, her dismissal, was now part of the story. No one was asking about her deal with the marketing startup anymore. No one cared about her networking brunches or her strategy workshops. They were all asking one thing: is this your husband? And the more they asked, the clearer the answer became. Not just that it was me, but that while she was busy laughing at my business cards, I had quietly turned one into a weapon and aimed it straight at the world she once thought she ruled. I didn't go home that night. Instead, I texted her an address: Zanzibar, the sleek rooftop lounge downtown where we used to have our date nights before the rot set into our marriage. I arrived just after 8. No grand entrance, just the quiet presence of a man who no longer had anything to prove. Vivian had been waiting in a corner booth for over an hour, rehearsing lines in her head, apologies that wouldn't sound like groveling, explanations that might sound sincere. Nothing she came up with had felt good enough. And now, seeing me walk in composed, unreadable, she knew why. I looked at her like someone might look at a hotel lobby they used to frequent. Familiar but not sentimental. She stood. I didn't know. She whispered over the hum of the rooftop crowd. I didn't raise an eyebrow, just nodded once, like she had finally caught up to a truth I'd been living with for years. I didn't know any of it, she continued. Not what you were building, not what it meant. Pierce, I didn't see it. You didn't want to, I said quietly. No anger, just fact. She stepped forward slowly, carefully. But we can still. I pulled back before she could reach for my hand, not harshly, not like rejection, more like a closed door that had always been locked. She'd just never bothered to check. No, I said, soft, final. Then without ceremony, I set a folder on the cocktail table right there in public. Standard manila, no branding, no weight except what it meant. She stared at it for a second before sitting down and opening it. Inside was a single legal packet drafted by my high-stakes divorce attorney, Vance Caldwell. Weaponized divorce papers served in public, separation, clean, uncontested, the forensic financial audit of our shared accounts laying bare every dollar, specific prenuptial agreement loopholes blown wide open, the hidden nanny cam footage, and the intercepted text chains proving she'd been sleeping with Preston Blake. Everything divided already. She realized in horror that it had all been drafted before the article dropped, maybe even before Thanksgiving. At the bottom of the final page was one handwritten line, just one. You threw the card. I kept the empire. Her throat tightened. This isn't you, she said, voice trembling. You're not like this. You never wanted. I wanted a partnership, I said. You wanted a performance. She shook her head. I was wrong. I tilted my head. You were loud. That stung more than she expected. I sat across from her, arms resting on my knees like I wasn't just across a small table but a canyon. I never asked to be worshipped, I said. I just asked to be respected. You were always so quiet about everything. She said, you didn't share because you weren't listening. I replied, matter of fact, you didn't ask what I was building. You asked when I'd be done playing entrepreneur. You called my meetings pretend work. You told your friends I was on my third maybe company. I thought I know what you thought. I cut in, and you made sure everyone else did too. Silence fell between us like smoke. She looked down at the folder again. No fight, no drawn-out legal bloodbath, just a surgical extraction. And underneath it all, the bitter truth. I wasn't doing this to her. I was just done doing for her. She looked up, eyes wet. You really won't even talk about fixing this? I did, I said, standing. For 7 years. She watched me walk toward the elevator, the same way I used to disappear down the hallway after tense dinners after she rolled her eyes at my plans. She used to think I was just retreating, pouting. Now she understood I had been building, and the distance she felt now wasn't new. It had always been there. She just never noticed it until she reached for a hand that was no longer waiting to be held. The dining room in Westlake Hills felt bigger this year, though nothing had changed. Same heavy oak table, same chandelier, too bright for the hour, same floral centerpiece her mother had commissioned like clockwork every Thanksgiving for the last 10 years. But the energy that was gone. Vivian sat with her elbows tucked in, chewing through dry turkey that tasted like cardboard dipped in guilt. The family still showed up, though fewer than before. Some stopped calling after the headlines. Others stepped back once it became clear her father's grip on the business was slipping. No one openly blamed her. They didn't have to. Her father looked older, thinner. He'd sold off a third of the company in Q2. Strategic divestment, he'd called it at the time. Everyone knew it wasn't. Her Uncle Charles had retired under health reasons, but Vivian had seen the resignation letter. He'd never recovered from the fallout. The company wasn't dead. It was just no longer theirs. Preston Blake was entirely bankrupt, his arrogance erased. The laughter was softer now. No bold toasts. No one jabbed at anyone's job or clothes or marriage this time. It was like they'd all tasted humility and didn't quite know how to chew it. Her cousin Jamie, one of the few who still spoke to her like she was human, sipped her wine and leaned in. Is he coming this year? She asked quietly. Vivian didn't answer, just gave a small shake of her head, eyes never leaving her plate. Jamie nodded. I figured. No one said my name anymore. Not her father, not her mother, not the cousins who used to snicker behind their champagne glasses about my pretend CEO routine. I had become the ghost that haunted the margins of every quarterly report, every supplier negotiation, every hollow phone call with legal, trying to claw back leverage they'd never truly owned. What stung most was how cleanly I had exited. No scorched earth, no vendetta, I just left. And the vacuum I left behind was louder than any revenge. Across town, in a converted brick warehouse with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Austin, I hosted a different kind of dinner. No nameplates, no family politics, just my new team, logistics leads, equity partners, Vance Caldwell, Hayes Covington, legal architects, tech heads, the people who had helped me quietly build what others mocked. The table was smaller, warmer, real. Between the turkey and bourbon, I passed out a stack of updated business cards. They were simpler now. Just my name, the company, and a phrase at the bottom. We don't explain, we execute. My team laughed. They understood. Some had been underestimated in their own circles too. It was why they followed me. Back at the estate, Vivian excused herself before dessert, claimed a headache. Truthfully, she just couldn't take the echo of her own voice from last year still ringing in her skull. Who even reads business cards anymore? She did now. She thought about the new team, the new table, the network that had replaced her. She used to sit next to the man who built it. Now she was just a cautionary tale, a name not on the invite list. The ballroom at the Austin proper had once been his territory. Her father used to glide through these events with a glass of scotch in one hand and a donor list in the other. Everyone knew his name. Men clapped him on the back. Women smiled like proximity to him meant access. For decades, he wasn't just a guest. He was the room. Tonight, though, something had shifted. The lighting hadn't changed. The catering was still from the usual high-end spots. The silent auction tables were still lined with glossy catalogs of luxury trips and framed memorabilia no one actually wanted. But the whispers were new. They followed him from the valet to the reception table. A few subtle glances, a hushed comment by the bar. Someone nudged their colleague as he walked by, murmured something behind a champagne flute. He tried to ignore it until he saw the sponsor wall 10 feet tall, flanked by orchids illuminated like an altar, and at the very center just below the platinum tier donors. Triarch, sleek, minimal, familiar. But what caught his attention was the line printed beneath it in smaller text in memory of those who built in silence. He stood there longer than he meant to. It wasn't grief he felt. Not exactly. It was something heavier, something slower. The sensation of watching your own name disappear from the ledger of relevance. A man passed by, didn't even greet him, just nodded vaguely and moved on. Another offered a handshake, but it was clearly out of courtesy, not recognition. At the far end of the room, a woman whispered to her date, "That's Mitchell, right? He used to run, what was it, Langston Supply?" The man shrugged. "I think Triarch absorbed them." That word again. Absorbed. He'd spent his life building something brick by brick, and now it was just folded in like a footnote. He left early. No scene, no goodbyes, just a quiet retreat through the lobby, past the coat check into the cold air outside. Vivian was already in the car, waiting. She didn't ask how it went. He didn't volunteer anything. They sat in silence for a moment, the engine idling. Then a couple walked out of the building, laughing softly. The man held a Triarch-branded gift bag. The woman, a crisp business card. She held it up in the glow of the overhead lights, reading aloud with a grin. "Executive partner." "That's the guy, right?" Vivian glanced out the window, saw the black-on-black card, the raised print. The name Pierce Harrison, her ex-husband. No face, no monologue, just a name and a title that now moved mountains and redefined silence. The woman slipped the card into her clutch as they walked to their car. Vivian looked down at her lap, didn't say a word. Her father adjusted the mirror, then pulled away from the curb. No one chased after them. No one noticed they were gone. For years, they had been the dynasty, the ones who laughed the loudest, talked over the room, owned the invitations, and controlled the table. Now their names didn't even make the wall, but mine did, and this time Vivian didn't laugh. She just lowered her head and finally understood. The man they mocked didn't just succeed. I made them irrelevant.